Hello and welcome to the PA Political Digest podcast. I'm your guide, Republican political consultant Christopher Nicholas, and we are joined today by a fellow Chris Borick, professor at Muhlenberg University there in the Valley, which is teeming with all those terrific colleges and universities. And Chris is also head of their Institute for Public Opinion there. Chris, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, it's a pleasure, Chris. Always happy to spend time with another Chris.
So what we're looking at today are a couple things to give people a heads up. One is Boric and his crew up there recently conducted another one of their annual statewide surveys on healthcare in Pennsylvania, correct? And
Correct.
then because where he is from, the Lehigh Valley is the center of the political universe, it seems, as we head into this primary season. We're also going to talk about the hot and heavy primary in the 7th Congressional District, as there are four Democrats battling it out to face Ryan McKenzie, a first-term Republican, in the fall. And then also a little bit on the hot and heavy state Senate primary there that covers most of Lehigh County and some of Upper Bucks, the 16th district, where again you have a big time two-way Democratic primary uh, of folks trying to take on first term incumbent Republican State Senator Jared Coleman. So, Chris, let's start with this statewide survey on public health, which I have to admit, until I saw this one, I didn't know you did. But one of the great things about surveys, I do surveys too, is you can look back over time and see how things are ebbing and flowing. So before I get to the question I'm most interested in that statewide survey, why don't you give us your big two or three takeaways because you've done them now for many years?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And yeah, we have done it for a while. I think back to like 2013. We've done this annual survey asking Pennsylvania adults a variety of questions related to health topics. Kind of public health is our frame. We do it with our public health program. So it's a wide-ranging look from issues of how people see their health care, the health system in Pennsylvania, to how they view particular issues, be it infectious disease or environmental threats, mental health challenges, a whole variety of topics. So it is a little bit of a potpourri of health-related questions. As you know, Chris, what's really neat is when you do this long enough, you start to build up some great time series data, and you can notice shifts within the Pennsylvania public on a variety of these topics that we look at. So we don't ask every question every year, but we ask a few of them almost every year, and then we revisit them over time. So this year, a couple of things stand out as you alluded to. One is affordability issues and just general attitudes about healthcare in the state. We've seen a downward shift over the last few years in the percentage of Pennsylvanians that are rating healthcare positively, an uptick in those that view it negatively. We ask them in open-ended formats what the biggest issues are facing the state. Cost, access are issues that are at the top of the list. I don't think that's surprising to anybody right now in the current
No.
environment, but it came across very clear. So I think we're seeing on the whole, on the macro level, some increasing anxiety and dissatisfaction with the healthcare environment broadly defined in the state. We see some interesting changes in how people might be viewing particular issues. One question I always like to call out, Chris, we've asked this question about how Pennsylvanians see the the relationship between immunizations and autism. So in the public health field, it is a big issue. 30 plus years ago, an article came out, said there was a link, and then for the next 30 years, there's been evidence of enormous quality and depth that says there is no link.
Correct.
Nevertheless, we want to measure that and see what it was. And for years, the percentage of Pennsylvanians that saw a link between these two things decline. Very few, as recently as 5 years ago, about 10% of Pennsylvanians felt agreed that there was some kind of link. At the end of COVID, about 2 years after the pandemic, we started to see an uptick in the percentage of Pennsylvanians that said, "Yeah, there might be a link." As you know, I think our views on immunizations might have changed. And then boom, the last 2 years, a major significant increase in the
It's now
percent,
37%, right, of
which is
Pennsylvanians that say they either strongly or somewhat agree with a link which has been refuted between childhood immunization and autism, which is,
that's
I think, very high. You're over a third.
yeah, highest we've seen on record. As you said, in my mind, have a third of the public either agree or strongly agree with that is quite telling. And of course, when people ask me, well, what happened? And I'm a political scientist. You're interested in politics. What comes out of elected officials and public leaders, especially those within your own party, those cues, we call them elite cues in academia, matter. And the key
And the key
cues that are coming out of Washington, Secretary of Health and Human Services, RFK Jr., certainly being prominent voice in that, I think has had an effect. So that's one example of tracking things. I know one issue that,
is
oh, go ahead.
is there a partisan skew in those
Overwhelming.
numbers?
Over-
When I do surveys, I like to see what the baseline is. So in this case, 37%. So who is significantly above that or significantly below that?
Great question, Chris. And as you're right, there is a partisan breakdown that's really significant. Uh, Republicans are much more likely to say they agree with the relationship, the unfounded relationship between MMR shots and autism. Democrats and independents are closer aligned in opposition or disagreement with that statement. Democrats, in this case, I loved. I'm sure you do too. See where independents break closer to the parties. They break closer to Democrats on this issue. And
I mean, after years and years of Republicans uh, making up ground in the voter registration rolls, the state today among active voters, which is what I measure as a political consultant, it's basically tied at 42% each. Democrats still maybe 25 or 30,000 more, which in a state with 8 million plus voters is, a tie. And so you've got the other essentially 15, 16% who are independents. And I always put this caveat that independents in Pennsylvania are people who are neither Republican nor Democrat. They can be nonpartisan, independent, Bull Moose Party. There's 42 of those people, libertarian, other, unknown. So a whole smorgasbord. But in a state where the two parties are tied, okay, I don't have advanced degrees like you do. I just have one. But as go the independents in statewide races, so goes the election.
so often the case, Chris. It really is. That group it's growing, right? As you know. Doesn't mean that an independent, I'm an independent, registered independent, have been since we moved back to Pennsylvania. Uh,
So is one of our Supreme Court justices as of today, David Wecht, who rocked the world yesterday because he left his own party, the Democrats, because too much, quote unquote, from his letter, too much Jew hatred. So that's an issue for another day. But they are the fastest growing
yes, that's
party identification in the state. When I first started doing primarily a lot of work in PA, which was late 80s, early 90s. Indies were like 6%, 7%. And now, like I said, they're 15, 16. So, uh,
despite, by the way, closed primaries, right? That disincentivize making that choice, right? So that's a
yeah,
great story.
I've been registering people to vote since I was 10. I was an early adopter. And I'd register people as Democrats before I wanted to be an independent because you were locking yourself out of half of the system, right?
I
You know,
told
why
my sons, yeah. When my
why
son
eat ice cream only one day of the week when you can have it every day of the week, right? So
I it when my sons became of age, I said, I don't care. I'm a registered independent. I don't care how you register, but if I were you, I would pick one of the parties because you're going to get much more bang for your buck in the state. So I miss voting in primaries. It's well, that's again story for another day, but happy
yeah.
to.
So one of the things that struck me here is voters do not trust RFK Jr. There's a rising tide of people thinking mistakenly there's a connection between MMR and autism. We see declining rates of measles inoculation, which is the one of the M's in MMR, measles, mumps, and rubella. Big stories in the Post Gazette and the Inquirer about dropping immunization rates. But then when you go further into your survey, people are asked about their primary care physician, their PCP. And I've had the same one for 30 years, and I think he's terrific. And other people in my family see him. So 84%, which to me is very high still, are basically in love with their primary care physician. So you've got this weird juxtaposition, right? They trust their family doctor, but some of the other stuff they're not so sure.
It's a beautiful point, Chris. Yeah, they do. And as someone that does polling, there's a trust deficit in the country. I've looked at this for years. Institutions, all our institutions, higher ed for sure, government, the media, and even so, things that for a long time had great trust, the military, which has always been really high. We've even seen declining trust there. One thing that it looks like, at least from our survey results, the relationship with those family physicians remains pretty strong, and people trust. And we juxtaposed it as you might have seen in the poll, Chris, with other things. How much do you trust, the CDC? How much do you trust artificial intelligence sources like chatbots? And
Yeah.
I'm sure you saw, people do not trust chatbots much for their medical use. We see why we ask the question is, our staff, we say, well, people are using it a lot. And so we said, well, do they trust it? And at least from our measure and some other measures I've seen nationally, there remains lots of distrust right now about what you get from that method.
The juxtaposition, the contrast between distrust but still trusting your PCP, it the corollary that I thought of was that people don't like politicians, want to get rid of them, think Congress is terrible. But then when you ask them about their specific member of Congress, oh yeah, he's a good guy, she's a good woman. So you get this kind of, mine is fine, but everybody else is for shit.
I love
And
that.
that's
Yeah,
when you
they,
ask people questions about crime, what I do is I split sample it. Split sampling means if you're talking to 500 people, you ask half of them version A of a question and half of them version B. So one of the things I do on questions about crime is I split sample it. I don't ask people about crime. Half get crime in their local region, half get asked about crime in the state or the country. The juxtaposition there again, they think crime is terrible elsewhere in the state or the country, but in their town, it's still pretty good.
Yeah, it's a great example. It's a great example. And you're right, because doctors are they're trained through the process, education, all the things that we might distrust. When they come out and they're yours, we look at them differently. I like the comparison to members of Congress.
So again, people, voters, they're allowed to have their cake and eat it too. In fact, that's to me is one of the big macro points in politics. That's what a lot of times people are searching for, right? They want to get best of both worlds.
Oh,
Okay,
so right.
that's why when you look at polls, sometimes you can go, geez, people are kind of schizophrenic in what they expect of people, what they want. They want politicians to be miracle workers, but they don't trust them. So, give me your little take on that before we
Oh,
go to the next
I
part
think
of the
that's I
poll.
think that's very true. I've polled for 30 years. And sometimes you'll read a poll result and you say, well, how could they think both of those things? And the reality is, well, as an academic, I might try to explain that, looking at a whole bunch of factors. As a political consultant, all my friends in your industry often think, well, we just have to work with that. That's the reality. That's where they're at. And that's how we have to message or do our work.
It's like generals, right? They don't go to war with the army they want. They go to war with the army they have at that particular day. So when you get back information in a poll, look, I don't dismiss polls. I do it. You do it. Sometimes a poll can be off bit, but overall polls point us in the right direction. But you just have to understand that that's how people are. They want to have dessert every day and then wonder why we gain weight. That's just kind of we're frail human beings, right? So,
We're measuring it, Chris. We're measuring and then trying to react to it depending on where we stand. So it's a never ending of interest to me.
oh, absolutely. And healthcare is a rising percent of what we spend money on. We have an aging population. Pennsylvania, again, one of the top 4 or 5 oldest states in the country. It's usually what Maine, West Virginia, and us in some sort of
Yeah.
order. In Pennsylvania, the further west and north you go, the older you get. We have two versions of the state. The last podcast we did was with University of Pittsburgh demographer, another Chris Bream. I'm on a big Chris kick here. And, he talks about, the changes in Western PA and, where I grew up in Bucks County, where you are, to me, that's East Coast Pennsylvania. Where Chris Bream is in Pittsburgh, that's Midwest Pennsylvania. So we're just different people. Did you break down by region in your poll? Is that something you did?
We didn't. We do have the data. We have it coded by zip codes.
County? Okay.
Yeah, and so, but we haven't done that kind of granular breakdown yet. But it always does, by the way, when we get to it later and we start to really look at it, it matters. You know, from a political perspective, how much geography matters. But we also see it as an overlay in lots of, things like access to care, or views on particular issues, or exposure to certain things. We ask questions on data centers and fracking, and so you could imagine proximity to those things would of course matter.
I mean, I like to break it down by we have 6 indigenous media markets in the state. And the example I use is the Pittsburgh media market, southwestern PA, has basically gone from being conservative Democrats to being conservative Republicans. And that happened in a generation. Uh, exactly.
Yeah.
So, the ring around Allegheny County, the ring around Pittsburgh is very, very conservative. And then you've got Allegheny County, which is kind of the liberal hole in the conservative donut out there. So the part of this survey I want to talk about now that most struck my eye, I am a big opponent of legalizing recreational marijuana, so we'll get that out right there. And I'm not going to ask your personal opinion on it because that doesn't matter. But what caught me here is since the high point of support of legalizing recreational marijuana in your survey was spring of 2021. So essentially 5 years ago. 58% Pennsylvanians said they favored that. It has now declined to 47%. That's an 11-point drop. I can do that sort of math. The people who are opposed to it essentially flat from 26% to 25. That's a statistical nothing burger. And then the way you asked it is, do you favor, oppose, or neither favor nor oppose it? So people who are like, I don't really care. And the spring of 2021, that was 14%. Now it's 24%. So you've had, to me, a net decrease of 10% and 11%, a 21% decrease in people who are saying, yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So I have some ideas, but you're the guy who did the poll. So what are you seeing there?
Yeah, no, I like how you framed it, Chris, and it's really interesting. And a lot of it, by the way, as a pollster, I always acknowledge the way we ask the question it could have an effect. I've seen other polls from really good folks that I really think do good work, and their findings, if they ask it, for example, kind of force you, don't give you an explicit neither favor or oppose. You're going
Only
to
two choices, yeah.
Yeah, you're going to see both the negatives and the positives rise because you're nudging, right, to do that. So talk about methods. But the way we've done it over time, and we kept it consistent once we started, so we could see these changes. And on the whole, by the way, if you look from when we started, over, about a decade and a half ago, we've seen a shift, right? Like many have seen increasing support for legalization. Pretty steady increase, by the way, and almost flipped from where we started to where we were a few years ago. And opposite.
In your first survey, I've got it right here. In spring of 2013, so that's 13 years ago, support was 33%. It reached 58 5 years ago, the high point. Now it's declined to 47. Pose it was at 40% 13 years ago. and has now uh, gone down to 25%. So that overall trend line is one way. What I was interested in is what happened in the last 5 years. To me, the issue has gotten more scrutiny. The
It's right.
conversation on it has become less one-sided, and it's not equal, but you now have pushback from opponents. So I'm just curious if you think that now that society is having more of a two-way conversation, if that's maybe hitting here.
I do, Chris. I think we saw this kind of push towards it, and we get the momentum that led it up to its high point a few years ago, and then it starts to become a more nuanced conversation. People experience it in different ways, right? If you're around and you see it more present, even if say you've said, "Yeah, I generally support it. I don't engage in marijuana use, but yeah, it's fine." But then you start to confront it, right? Maybe you see it out in public, or you have a reaction to it. You hear of use in certain environments, and you're thinking, "Ah, I don't really like that much." It may soften kind of your it might move your soft support to the place where it becomes, well, I'm kind of indifferent on it now. And that's my gut instinct. We don't have enough follow-up questions to really get at that for me to say with 100% confidence, but putting our results in conversation with other studies, I think you've seen that get to the stage right now, the public support, where you get folks that are just not necessarily feeling as strongly positive about it. Again, I'll say it, it's a 2-to-1 ratio, favor to oppose. It's still, if you look at that balance, but some of the momentum that was there for years that I saw building, I think has become a little more complicated right now, a little more nuanced, where people aren't necessarily, and if you break it down, partisan wise, and people ask me, well, why isn't Pennsylvania legalized? You're a Republican consultant. Among Republicans, we see opposition still fairly significant compared to Democrats and independents. And of course, you respond to your constituencies. So it's become a less clear path to me from a public opinion perspective than it had been 5 years ago, right? Where one might say, well, this is headed in one direction.
The last couple of states that have had referendums have voted no against that. And what I think has happened is back when Colorado did it, they were the first state, if I remember correctly. It was all about conjecture. We think legalizing it might mean X, it might mean Y. Now I think there's enough of a history and enough states that have done it. California, for example, has more marijuana grown by Mexican cartels than they did before they legalized it, right? More people are dying in highway accidents because you have more people under the influence because the marijuana that's sold is super high potency. That's what the companies that do this, the example I give is if you walked into a liquor store and there was nothing available but grain alcohol, the most high potency alcohol. That's kind of what the big marijuana wants to do. But so what I'm thinking is you've got people who have gone from favoring it, not to opposing it, but to being kind of mensa mensa. I'm not sure. One of the things we do in polling is we ask people, are you strongly for something or only somewhat? And what we've seen, for example, with President Trump's job approval, even among Republicans, it hasn't gone down a lot, but it's softened. You have more Republicans going from strongly approved to somewhat. We kind of see that march here. Whether it continues, who knows? But I think as the conversation has become more two-sided, it's not something up in the air for people. They have a concrete example. As you said, they've had to deal with it. Maybe if they travel to Jersey, you guys are right there on the border with Jersey, or you go to some other state that has it. So it's not a hypothetical.
I love your present. I think that's exactly right, Chris. I think it's become for a segment. We haven't seen, as you said, opposition increase at all. We have seen, I think, a significant portion of Pennsylvanians that might have been leaning in that direction now, saying, again, we don't ask it in the intensity scale that if we had, but that have gone to the point where they're like, yeah, I could see pros and cons on this, and I'm just not feeling confident one way or the other in terms of my support.
reminds me of what maybe 15 years ago when uh, there was an effort, ultimately successful, to legalize beer and wine in supermarkets. Pennsylvania, of course, famously has a liquor control board and state stores. And it was kind of popular, but not really any intensity.
Yeah.
People were kind of like, well, okay, if that happens, which I think is one of the reasons it took forever because people just, you know, they didn't care about it that much. So when I see a question like this, you know, neither favor nor oppose going up 10 points in 5 years, that's what it reminds me of. It's just not a top even 10 issue, let alone top five.
Yeah, yeah, I would imagine for those folks, if we had done any follow-ups and asked them to rank it in saliency, probably that would be the case.
Some other places that test this and give people three options like you did, favor, oppose. Sometimes they have the third option has been to decriminalize it. And it's the same thing I've seen here where support for legalizing it goes way down. Decriminalization is kind of an amorphous thing. It's people know what it means, but not particular. So that's what fascinates me about this issue. Like you said, if you give people just two options, favor is above 50. When you give them a third option, it goes down to what we have here. So if you were a prognosticator advising the General Assembly on this, would you say that this is a winning issue to still go out there and try to legalize it, or would you say it's kind of becoming more of a nothing burger and it's not a top priority for folks?
Yeah, it's really that's a great way to frame it, and it's a challenging response that I would give them, or at least challenging to me, in the sense, Chris, I would say, well, yeah, if you're looking at the broader perspective, this is one that you probably, if you're going to engage in it, probably end up on the side of legalization still. You know, you could probably make an easier case there, and you look at public opinion, it's leaned that direction and it's changed over time. Of course, you'd have to look at this through the lens of partisanship, right? If I was a Republican legislator and I'm looking at this, I'm certainly not diving in headfirst. And you can see the reticence and why that might be the case. Yeah, this is an issue that, like I said before, I think these results, put them in conversation with everything else that we talked about, and take them for what they're worth, do show it's not the slam dunk that some folks would tell you, that's for certain. And that I think I might bide some more time and see where people head the next few years if I had the luxury of offering such thoughts, Chris.
We need more data, right,
Oh
Professor?
yeah.
That's what we need.
You know, I'm a
Um,
pollster, always.
always lean in favor of more data. So the last couple of years in Governor Shapiro's budgets, it's just been assumed that marijuana has been legalized and it's cranking out, four or $500 million. And legislators on both sides have been kind of pumping the brakes, saying even if we legalized it today, it's a year until it starts creating any money. So that has been part of the state budget friction in Harrisburg. I know the state budget does not engender as much interest outside the capital here as does in your part of the world. So before we wrap up on the healthcare part, move to the campaign side, is there anything in the healthcare part that you wanted to mention that I didn't get to?
No, Chris, I think we hit some of the really my favorite takeaways, right? And those time series things that we could see change on issues that are relevant and to Pennsylvania. I won't go too far into it. I'll just mention we started looking at data centers. Everybody's looking at data centers right now and seeing, do people from a broader perspective think it's a crisis or is a problem, or if it's not a problem? And we got about a fifth of Pennsylvanians that think this is a crisis, about a fifth that says it's not a problem, and a big chunk that said, or but fifth that says it's a crisis, fifth that says it's not a problem at all, and then the rest saying it's a problem but not a crisis. So it's going to be interesting to start tracking that issue and how people view it as in the broader environment of the state as something that might be affecting the overall health quality of the state. We see it on the ground, right? You know this. It's absolutely animated lots of individuals in the state that cross partisan bounds. I
That's
grew
the
up.
fascinating part is unlike 90% of issues, you can't slot it that Democrats are X and Republicans are Y, because a
Totally.
lot of it is basically where you live. If there's been one in your backyard, people don't believe the jobs claims because again, it's amorphous. It's up in the sky. You ask people about crises. The one that hit me the hardest because it was the largest was that 60% said drug addiction is a crisis, and of the things you ask people about in terms of crises, that was, I mean, 60% is a lot. And then
It,
the
it
other thing that I saw too, then I'll let you comment on both, is there's still 73% of the public that say childhood vaccinations should be required for school enrollment, accepting only those with medical exemptions if they're too frail to get it. So you've obviously got some people that are concerned about again, not really there at all connection between autism and childhood immunizations, who think people should still be getting childhood immunity. So again, going back to that kind of schizophrenic thing. But feel free to comment about those before we move on
Yeah,
to
I won't
politics.
spend too much time. I know we got chat about a few other things, but yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. The substance abuse one is again that crosses boundaries, right? We see overwhelming acknowledgement of that among Democrats, Republicans, Independents. We've tracked a bunch of questions over time. We didn't ask this year about opioid abuse, and we see that same thing
Well,
hold up.
people have it in their lives, right? It's not an amorphous issue. It's my next door neighbor's kid, my cousin. You know, to me, it was the same thing when gay marriage picked up steam in terms of favorability. Again, it wasn't some just gay person off in the distance. It was your college roommate, your next door neighbor, your uncle. Became personalized, and that's what I see
Opportunity
with the drug addiction part too.
for sure.
Yeah. So we're going to move a little bit now into politics. The professor is located in the Lehigh Valley. The Lehigh Valley is generally considered to be the counties of Northampton County, which has most of Bethlehem and Easton, and Lehigh County, which has Allentown. It's within the Philadelphia media market, but its own separate TV market, radio market, that type of thing. So it's kind of a market within a larger market. And it just happens to be, to me, the location of the most fascinating congressional primary in Pennsylvania. I would not have said that at the beginning of the year. I would have picked another one, but this one, primaries again, voters have a chance to have their cake and eat it too. So they have different slices of candidates. The four candidates are, and help me, Carol Abando Durstein.
Yep,
Did I get all
Abando.
those names right?
Yep.
Abando Durstein, a former aide to Senator Bob Casey, a former engineer with PPL, Brian Crosswell, until recently a Republican who grew up in Schuylkill County, who was a DOJ prosecutor who resigned because the case he was working on against the mayor of New York got thrown out, and he said, "To heck with that." You've got Lamont McClure, to me, central casting, the former two-term Democratic county executive in Northampton County. There's like 6 or 7 counties in the state that don't do county executives, that don't do county commissioners, that do county executives, which is more like governor of that county. And then Bob Brooks, the tattooed blue collar everyman du jour. That seems to be a popular archetype for Democrats this year. So there's been a ton of outside spending. The first outside spending was all Bob Brooks. Now it's anti-Bob Brooks and anti-Crosswell and pro-Lamont McClure. The governor's been involved with Bob Brooks for forever. The former Congresswoman Susan Wild, Democrat who just lost, is for Bando Durstein. Um, Former state party chair TJ Rooney, a state rep from that area back in the day, is for McClure. So if you're a Democrat there, you're not a Democrat there, but you're there. What's the feeling of, wow, why is all this happening to us?
It's a great rundown, very impressive. Chris, that's the landscape that you describe is very much, first of all, kind of the landscape, the literal political landscape. It is incredibly competitive district. It's one of the most competitive, top 10 competitive districts in the country. As you said, it's the Lehigh Valley, which is about as purple-ish as you get. The district became a little more red after the last redistricting when you added Carbon County in, took out a Democratic part of Monroe County, kind of switched those. So probably, by the way, without that switch, Susan Wild's still the congresswoman from the district. It was actually
I agree. She got elected in 2018 when the state Supreme Court took it upon themselves to redraw districts. In the redraw, they made the 8th district of Matt Cartwright safer for him and made her district less safe. Matt Cartwright had seniority over her. Ironically, in 2024, they both lost. The 7th district is uh, the most Hispanic congressional district in the state outside a big city. And to let folks know, I do this voter registration guidebook every year or so. And so Mackenzie won last time with 50.5% of the vote, very close. The voter registration there now is 39.5% Republican, 41% Democrat, 19.5% independent. In 2024, Trump won with 51.1% of the vote. So you see that Trump got 51.1 in 24. And at the same time, McKenzie was just below, which is the case with most congressional races, at 50.5. Shapiro, in his 22 landslide win, got a little over 55% there. So that very narrow trading range for that. And McKenzie was, I think, seen as a fairly moderate, low key, longtime state representative, kind of a professional legislator type. And now we have this $3 million primary easy when you add in outside money of all these four folks. Uh, Bob Brooks was in the lead with the most recent poll, but that's because he had been on TV before the other candidate. So you have friends and neighbors and family members there. What are they saying about this,
Yeah.
Chris?
No, it is. It's it's you can see why both parties think they could win because they can win this district. They have, and so that's bringing lots of attention. Congressman McKenzie is going to be well funded. He's an experienced political figure. He's got the tides going against him in a midterm like this. That's for sure. Democrats think they could ride that tide. That's why you see the interest they do. As you described, Chris, I think the array of candidates that are in the field do capture various lanes, cohort segments of the modern Democratic Party. So you got all your flavors, if you will. Uh, Brooks, I think, in many ways, as you said, got a little bump in terms of the early part of this race. He has resources. Those resources were augmented, I think, by the support he's got from Governor Shapiro. It's enormous. I don't put usually that much stake in endorsements. That's a big one, not only because of Shapiro's status in his own party, but because what it brings with that, the resources, the credibility, right, to go out and do that. So I thought that was gigantic when it happened. But it's also put a target on him in some ways as the, I guess, de facto front runner in the race. There's not a ton of polling in it. What polling has showed is a lot of undecideds, with Brooks having a little bit of a lead. And now you've seen politics play out. You've seen kind of the trend of uh, opposition parties getting engaged in the other's parties, a primary, right, to try and maybe cook the books, including Josh Shapiro, by the way, uh, with Doug Mastriano a few years ago. And that's what's playing out. I think the idea, the concept is that maybe Brooks is a good fit with the time, the era, his place in the politics for this district, and might be the toughest to beat. I think Republicans might like to see somebody else in the race. But I think all the candidates have some type of appeal. They all have their warts, but let's take someone like Carol Abando der Stein. It's a party where there's mostly female voters. Women are voters. It's as you mentioned, a district with a very large Latino population. She's a Latina. It's she I think would have some clear appeal. She hasn't run a lot. She's been involved in politics. So from my perspective, it's been a fascinating primary to follow. You do have those flavors. It's getting in the home stretch here quite intense. I get my mail. I live in Nazareth over in Northampton County. My mailers, that we're seeing now. My wife's a registered Democrat, so I get to see like what happens in her appeal. So I love collecting these and seeing how
Here, here's what fascinates me. Lamont McClure got in first, well-respected county executive from Northampton County. Normally, you would say that's a great recruit. And then the woman got in the race, Obando Durstein, and boy, an Hispanic engineer endorsed by the former Democratic member, right? And then you get the big time anti Trump former Republican Ryan Crosswell, who's raised a ton of money. And then Shapiro said, the heck with all them. I'm going to get this guy, the tattooed blue collar guy, um, the Nazi tattoo guy up in Maine, Graham Plattner. His consulting team is the same consulting team that is helping Bob Brooks, and they are the remnants of John Fetterman's team from 2018. They may not admit that anymore. But last week, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, the DCCC, the D Trip as we call it, endorsed Bob Brooks. Again, Shapiro, them putting the thumb down. And I put out a tweet that said, given all of Brooks's foibles, he's being sued by his mother-in-law for bilking her out of a house. He married two women with the same exact name, which is just so bizarre. I think the National Republican Congressional Committee would also endorse Bob Brooks now because it seems like he's taken on water, right?
well,
And there's a lot of there with Mr. Brooks is what I sense.
I like Chris. Chris, I love that point, and I think absolutely that's there's openings there. The one thing I'd say is, have we been a little bit, and this is the political scientist person in me that says, are we a little desensitized to some of those things now in this contemporary era, and that especially with Democratic energy and others, they're willing to kind of look past some of those things in ways they haven't before. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. But I think maybe the calculus on the part of the DCCC and Shapiro and his folks is that, yeah, you know what? We know all that stuff. I would imagine they knew all that stuff, and said, yeah, you know what? He's still the model. He's the type of person we want in. We think we could do this. It's a good cycle. This is it. That's my bet.
So it's kind of a deal with the devil, right? Lamont McClure, the former Norco executive, is kind of standard issue Democrat, maybe not very exciting. I think acquitted himself well in his two terms. Has some
One big elections too, and a big part of the district, right? Overwhelmingly strong election. So just as that point, yeah.
and they just passed term limits in Northampton County. You can't be a county executive more than two terms, but it didn't apply to him. But he kind of self-selected and said, I'm going to walk away. You just don't see that with politicians. And Brooks, it's kind of like it's a deal with the devil, right? It came out that he had a lot of anti-Obama social media messages and some pro-gun social media messages. But he's the archetype that Democrats seem to think now are important, kind of blue collar folks who can
Yeah.
win back the blue collar vote that has morphed over from the Democrats to the Republican. Both coalitions are kind of, doing a weird dance now. Upper income, upper educated voters are moving much more quickly to the Democrats. They've mostly been Republicans. Blue collar folks have mostly been Democrats, but now they can. So I always say, if you're bored with Pennsylvania politics, Chris, wait 6 months because it changes. So
It totally does.
okay, so you also are home, not you particularly, but to a hot and heavy state Senate primary there. First term incumbent Republican Jarrett Coleman represents the 16th district, which is the upper third of Bucks County, and then basically everything in Lehigh County except for the bulk of the city of Allentown. So overall, it's a Republican leaning district. I'm going to get the voter stats here in a second, but why don't you tell us about the Democratic primary there?
Yeah, like you said, it is a Republican leaning district. I think it's maybe a plus 12 or something like that. You'll get the details. But it's a primary where you have two Democrats, Mark Pensley, Lehigh County Controller, who's been a presence in local politics for years, running for lots of offices.
He's like a perennial candidate, but who's also an office holder at the
Yeah,
same time.
yes, he's won office a lot, and been on ballots seemingly for as long as I've been in the Lehigh Valley, quarter century. I probably a little exaggeration there, but certainly he's been a presence. And it's a Lehigh County, more of a Lehigh County district than a Bucks County district. So that's he's got a little bit of brand name recognition. He's won office in the county before. He's going up against a Bucks County candidate who's Bradley Merkel Gump. I hope I get the words right. I think.
He is a male hyphenated name, which I
Yes.
always am fascinated by. He's a Upper Bucks County school board member
Yeah.
who helped flip his school board from red to blue, and I call it like Bob Brooks is. He's the Bradley Merkel Gump is the anointed candidate. All of the state Senate Democratic leaders, like the leader Jay Costa and others, have endorsed him. Steve Sanacero, who's another member of leadership and a state senator from another part of Bucks County, has endorsed him. So I kind of think it's fascinating that Pinsley, who is a perennial candidate, but who has won election in Lehigh County at least twice, is all of a sudden so toxic that they go find someone from the less democratic part of the district in Merkel Gump, say, we're going to push you up.
Yeah, I think you laid it out the way I see it, Chris. And I believe that there's a perception that Pensley might not be the strongest candidate in this district. Again, it's a Republican lean district. You got a good wind at your back if you're a Democrat. That's why I think, by the way, they think, this is the cycle if they could do that.
So
And
Jarrett Coleman beat an incumbent Republican
uh,
4 years ago and won the general election with 54% of the vote. The voter registration there, 47% Republican, 34.5% Democrat, 18.5% independent. But Trump won that with 51.8% of the district. So Jarrett Coleman can say he got a higher percentage than President Trump did. They were up in different years. State
yeah,
senators here run in 4 years. So uh, Coleman won in 2022. But at the same time that Shapiro, Attorney General Shapiro, then was winning the state Senate seat, Jarrett Coleman, the Republican, won too. So the Democrats, especially state Senate Democrats, are like, we're going to ride Shapiro's coattails. And I'm like, boy, 4 years ago, he won by what, 16%? That's pretty big coattails. So,
not deliver.
um,
Here's my thought, Chris, on the, why this district, and first of all, the primary we already talked about. Senator Coleman, his first term, a little more vulnerable his first term than we see historically. Also, he's very conservative. I think if you look at his record, his rhetoric, his approach, he's been identified as quite conservative, and maybe, just maybe, a little more conservative than the district as a whole that I and the way
yeah,
I think about it. So that combination that you might have someone that's a little bit farther out over their skis, uh, and you get a cycle that is brewing the way this cycle seems to be brewing. You know all about cycles, and you could pick a good candidate. The party, the Democrats think they have, that's why they put their thumb on the scale, I guess, in this district. They think maybe we can catch lightning in a bottle. And the holy grail for Democrats in the state, they really want the Senate.
yeah,
They're going to need a district like this to happen. So that's why I think it's all kind of put together
you
the
know,
way it has been in the district, in the.
my late father was on the school board in Bristol Township. He was the only Republican with 8 Democrats. And I really learned then that in politics, all shit rolls downhill, and the school board members are
Yeah.
at the bottom of the steepest hill. So it's always problematic when you run school board people for higher office because they have controversial votes on, genderized bathrooms and tax increases and
Yeah.
closing schools or realigning school territories. So there's a lot of oppo you can go
Oh,
after on those folks. So anyway, Chris Borick, thank you. I want to give you a moment now to plug Muhlenberg University and your Institute for Public Opinion up there. What should
sure.
people know?
Sure, I'll make one quick correction. It's still Muhlenberg College, so
College, I'm sorry.
that's
Sorry,
no problem.
Muhlenberg
No,
College.
that happens all the time. The university is a lovely thing, but we go by college. The
Okay.
institute, just a really quick plug. You gave it a perfect opportunity. Is just finishing up celebrating the 25th anniversary. So big celebration of the spring. The institute started in 2001. Been highly lucky to be involved with it for all those years. Done a lot of work statewide, electoral politics, of course, being in Pennsylvania, we play our role there. But I'm most interested in a lot of the work like we've done on public health issues, on environmental issues. We do a lot of energy and environment research. Over time, we do, as Lehigh Valley resident, a resident of the Lehigh Valley, we do lots of work right here. Regional quality of life studies, working with partners to study what I would consider one of the most fascinating areas of the state, both politically and just in general. So it's been lucky to be part of it.
How big is Muhlenberg College?
It's about 1,600 students, 16, 1,700. Classic Pennsylvania small liberal arts college, Centennial Conference.
Of which we have so many and such a wide variety.
Indeed. We're lucky.
When I applied to college, I applied to four small private liberal arts colleges, not Muhlenberg, and then a bigger school in DC, American University, where I ended up going because I thought I either want to do politics right here or go to the center of the universe. So, but we have such a terrific higher education system all across the state. The Lehigh Valley, just there's so many different colleges and universities. It's really it punches above its weight class, I think,
I
in
agree.
terms of how many colleges and universities. I won't make you name your competitors up there, but
Great
people
schools.
can
Great.
people can look it up themselves. So, uh, Chris Borick, professor at Muhlenberg College, head of their Institute for Public Opinion. Thanks for being with us on the PA Political Digest podcast. And folks, do not forget to vote. Election Day, we're taping this on Tuesday, May 12th. So, Election Day is a week from today for those of us like me, not like the professor who's an independent, but for people like me, he'll be voting in the primary. Thanks again, Chris. Have a good day.
Pleasure, Chris. All the best.
Take care.